There's only so long a culture can emphasize Enlightenment rationalism before the human heart is going to pop up and say, bruh, you got to feel stuff too. So here at the end of Unit 5, we're going to see exactly how that happened with the rise of Romanticism. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. By the way, I've got follow-along notes for this video, and you can find those at the link in the description. So as we talked about in Unit 4, the Enlightenment came to dominate European thought in the 18th century, and at the very least among the elite, although it did filter down to the masses eventually. And the key emphasis of the Enlightenment was to apply rational, rigorous, scientific thought to every human institution. So there was a kind of cold, calculating aura to this kind of thought. Enlightenment thinkers believed, in general, that if you couldn't math out your conclusions or prove them in a logical syllogism, then you couldn't really know it. But Romanticism rose up in the end of the 18th century to challenge such rational ways of interpreting the world. By definition, Romanticism acted as a balance to reason by emphasizing other means of knowing like intuition and imagination. Additionally, Romantics held to individualism, which emphasized the glory of the unique traits of each human being. Now, surprisingly, we can actually trace the roots of this movement back to one of the greatest Enlightenment thinkers, namely Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who admittedly had somewhat of a strained relationship with reason as the sole means to interpret the world. Rousseau differed from his Enlightenment colleagues by emphasizing feelings and passions, sometimes above reason itself. He believed and taught that God was benevolent and accessible through a person's affections, therefore alienating those rascally deists. He also emphasized the moral improvement of the self and society, and with all this emphasis on subjectivity, Rousseau is typically seen as the forerunner of the Romantic movement. So in terms of the arts, Romanticism rejected the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and Neoclassicism's emphasis on sterility and control. Romantics emphasized emotional exuberance, imaginative exploration, and spontaneity. And you can see this emphasis pretty clearly in Romantic literature. Some Romantic writers felt deeply for their own people and their own history and thus produced works that engendered nationalism. For example, the Grimm brothers collected German fairy tales and morality stories and published them under the title Children's and Household Tales. I'd wager you've heard some of these stories. You have Cinderella, Snow White, Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty, etc. The point is, these stories helped Germans feel more German, and that in turn had an effect on politics. Now, along those lines, after the French Revolution, it became clear to Europeans that revolution, war, and rebellion demonstrated the emotional power that comes when people are united by nationalism and engage in mass politics. So as Romanticism gained a foothold in Europe, these emotionally charged tactics would be used over and over again because it was precisely the emotion that the Romantics praised. Okay, back to literature. Romantic poets, while taking up many different themes, all seem to emphasize the love of nature. For example, British poet William Wordsworth believed that human beings had a kind of mystical connection to nature, and only by learning the depths of the created order could humans truly know themselves. He abandoned the structure and rigidity of classical forms of poetry and instead wrote in ordinary language, lifting up ordinary objects into a realm of glorious contemplation. And then visual artists got caught up in the Romantic spirit as well. And most of the visual arts of this movement basically shared two characteristics. First, art is the outer manifestation of the artist's inner feelings. And second, art must display emotion, warmth, and movement, which of course is a fundamental rejection of the neoclassical movement's emphasis on restraint and symmetry. For example, here's Caspar David Friedrich's painting Wanderer Above a Sea of Fog. It's clear that Friedrich had a mystical view of nature, like you can feel that landscape. But he also exhibits the emphasis on individualism. Here's the singular wanderer with his back toward the viewer, perhaps in contemplation, perhaps in awe, but regardless, there is a sense of triumph and trepidation. And music was also changed by the Romantic movement as well, and perhaps no other composer did more to change it during this period than Ludwig van Beethoven. At the beginning of his career as a composer, Beethoven's music reflected the restrained classicism of his teachers and influences. But by 1804, he was composing music squarely in the Romantic strain, which was able to produce fear and rapture and pain and longing in his audiences. So, like real romantic. Now, after the beating religion took during the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, Romanticism came in to revive it. And perhaps there is no better illustration of this than the rise of Methodism in England. It was a movement founded by John Wesley, who was an Anglican priest. And for years as a young priest, he struggled mightily to perform his Christian duties, even going so far as to become a missionary to England's American colonies. But no matter how hard he tried to please God, no matter how strictly he attended to his prayers, Wesley was unable to escape the feelings of guilt before God. But one night in England, he attended a religious meeting, and as the minister was reading a passage from Martin Luther, Wesley had a profound experience. He said that his heart had been strangely warmed, and that he was convinced by that experience and not by the mountain of good deeds that he had done that God had loved him. And that experience inflamed Wesley to go out preaching the gospel, and he preached that his followers must have a real relationship with God through Christ, and the manner in which a person knows that they are a true Christian is by means of a powerful conversion experience in which the saved person encounters the living God in power. And so it's pretty easy to see the Romantic strains of that. Anyway, the Methodist movement spread rapidly across England and then across Europe and then into America as well. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 5 of AP Euro. And click here to grab my AP Euro review pack if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. Now I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.